Have you ever read somebody completely wrong? That first impression, that first encounter of them has led you to potentially a judgment which you realize much further down the line was way off, completely wrong. My most vivid memory of this was Che Collins, my first day at university, at registration. Fiery red hair, covered in freckles, piercing, dangerous eyes. Spiky hair was the fashion in those days. He's a big guy. And he was bouncing around anxiously. He looked aggressive. In fact, he was telling one of the lecturers off why the registration was taking so long. He had the thickest Cockney accent you've ever heard. And then he came over and introduced himself and said, "My name's Che." And I thought to myself, I don't want to be your friend at university. And then he invited me next week. Well, in fact, he invited himself to my house to come and do some study. And I did not have him down as the studious type. And he came round, and actually we had so much in common. And that was the beginning of my best friendship with Che Collins. All of my preloaded assumptions shattered. Getting to know him exposed those assumptions, exposed my bias about him. Taking the time to get to know someone means that we don't remain blind to who they are and the beauty in them. And a little bit of that is what's going on in our story in the Bible according to Lego, unofficially. The story is the road to Emmaus. We've got two disciples who know Jesus really well, whose assumptions about him and about how the world works are being exposed. Not in a good way either. That's what's going on in this passage. And those assumptions that they hold, the ones that are being exposed, is all to do with how Israel was to be redeemed, rescued, as it finds itself again, Israel, in captivity and oppression by another empire, another superpower, the Roman Empire. They've gone back to the beginning. It's like they're back in Egypt again. They're slaves to this empire again. But what they long for is to be saved and rescued from that. They believe that Jesus was that bloke, the Messiah, the long-awaited, the prophesied Messiah to come and save them. But 3 days ago, he was arrested, publicly humiliated, beaten the bejeebers out of, and brutally murdered on a cross. They must be wondering, what on earth has gone wrong? And what's really interesting about this story is where they're headed, to Emmaus. See, 100 years earlier, there was a battle led by a family called the Maccabees, or a group of people. There was a huge war. The oppressors then were the Syrians, and the Maccabean revolt, and a revolt it was, just 7 miles outside of Jerusalem, led this huge battle, and they won. But that momentarily redemption from an enemy, and momentary it was through force, and it was through death. The Syrians were killed. They were wiped out and pushed out from that region. And where the disciples were headed reveals what they assumed about Jesus. They were hoping for a revolt, part 2. They hoped that's what Jesus was leading. And they end up on the way to road to Emmaus in the hope that a war and a battle and the killing had begun. So on that basis, Jesus was a total disaster, a flop, a failure. But Jesus had a very different vision for what redemption looked like. Not just for Israel either, for the whole of humanity. And earlier on in Luke's gospel, in chapter 6, we get a snippet of this vision of what redemption looks like. And I'd love to read it to you. This is the Message version, so it's a bit more street. So I'm going to read it over you if that's okay. It says this. It's the words of Jesus. To you who are ready for the truths, I say this. Love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the supple moves of prayer for that person. If someone slaps you in the face, stand there and take it. If someone grabs your shirt, gift wrap your best coat. Make it a present for them. If someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more payback. Live generously. Here's a simple rule of thumb for your life. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you and grab the initiative and do it for them. If you only love the lovable, anyone can do that. If you only help those who help you, do you expect a medal? Anyone can do that. If you only give for what you hope to get out of it, do you think that is charity? The stingiest of people can even do that. I tell you, love your enemies. Help and give without expecting in return. You'll never, I promise, regret it. Live out this God-created identity the way our Father lives towards us, generously and graciously, even when we are at our worst. Our Father is kind. Be kind. The teaching, the thinking of Jesus bothers us. It nags us. It disrupts us. It challenges everything we know, everything we think. It exposes our pre-loaded assumptions of the world, of ourselves, and of God. It's interesting that the two disciples had spent so much time with him. But even in all that time, it's possible to follow Jesus and not truly know him for who he is. Jesus wants to shatter our pre-loaded assumptions, our biases. Because Jesus is redeeming all of humanity from something far deeper, far more deadly than human enemies. He's redeeming us from the root cause of why we've even got enemies in the first place. The next bit of the story, with the flip chart, Jesus is taking the disciples through a whistle-stop tour of the Bible in a nutshell, if you like. He's revealing a story of how all of humanity is caught in a web. It's in a never-ending cycle where to look out for me and my own, even if that means to cost others, is okay. Where those who were once oppressed have now been redeemed but have become the oppressor is the norm. Where the assumptions and the hope that God is pro us and against them, whoever them be. And he's trying to show them that the Bible points to the ultimate way of getting rid of the root cause, and that is through the suffering of the messianic servant king. Having a lot of fun down there. Jesus' death reveals that God's ultimate purpose was not to kill the enemy, but was to die for the enemy. It's beautiful. In Jesus, God binds himself to this human condition. His death is not a tragedy. It's how humanity is to be redeemed. Jesus, by taking everything into himself, the full tragedy, the train wreck of the worst of the human condition, allowing it to defeat him so that he might defeat it through his resurrection from the dead. His death and resurrection both defeats the enemy and rescues and saves and redeems the enemy in the most remarkable, beautiful way. Love your enemy is a stupid idea if he didn't rise from the dead. And I should be out there playing golf because it's beautiful weather and I've lost my touch around the greens. I'm not playing well at the moment. But if he did, if Jesus did rise from the dead, the only way to defeat the enemy your enemy, the evil in our world, is through love. Loving your enemy is the only way to win. If your hope is in a God who himself overcame death on a cross, conquering it with love and his resurrected life. And if true, then everything I think about the world, I've got to rethink it. Everything I think about myself, I've got to rethink it. Everything I think about who God is, I've got to rethink it. The resurrection of Jesus is rebuilding our thinking. It's changing our state of what we are. To change state is like a scientific process of heat, like heating water. It turns to steam. It's the same thing, but it's different. Our state is being changed by the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And instead of pulling the will of God to our way of thinking, to our plans, pulling his plans in prayer and petition to what we want, Easter Sunday asks or makes us ask the question to ourselves, are we on his side? Not is he on my side? And at the end of the story of the breaking of the bread, Jesus takes the bread, gives thanks, breaks it, gives it to his disciples. It's just what he's done hours before his arrest at the Passover meal. These are the symbols he's given to his disciples to internalize the story of his broken body, of his shed blood. And as he gives it, and they take it, then their eyes are opened as to who he is. Assumptions shattered, new thinking beginning. It's only when the disciples humble themselves, they put their baggage aside, they put their preloaded assumptions to one side. Everything they've thought about the world, themselves, and God is put to one side. And then they allow the scandal of the cross, this is scandalous of Jesus, to come to them personally. And in that moment, they truly allow God to give himself to them. God confronts his enemy by dying for them. That is absolutely scandalous. It is absolutely beautiful. It's beautiful for you. It's beautiful for me. It's beautiful for the whole world and not just a group of people. It's hope for our world. It's hope because when we open our doors, we open the door to God to let him in, we discover through the death and resurrection that God had his doors open the whole flipping time. Amen. Amen. And on Easter Sunday, as part of this celebration, we are going to take communion together. We're going to take the bread and the wine. Will you truly allow God to give himself to you this morning? Band, should we come?